It began like any other Sunday. On December 6, 2009, Susan Powell attended church with her husband, Joshua, and their two sons, Charlie and Braden. The family returned home in the afternoon, and a neighbor dropped by, staying until approximately 5 p.m. That visit would mark the final time anyone outside the Powell household ever saw Susan alive. The following morning, December 7th, Susan failed to show up for work. Alarm bells rang when her children didn't arrive at daycare. Concerned by this unusual absence, Joshua's mother, Terica, along with his estranged sister, Jennifer Graves, went to the family home in West Valley City, Utah. With no response at the door and increasing concern, they contacted the police. Authorities arrived shortly after and forced entry into the Powell residence, fearing the possibility of carbon monoxide poisoning or another domestic emergency. No one was inside. But the scene was strange. Two box fans were pointed at a damp patch on the living room couch, an unusual and troubling discovery. Susan's personal items, including her purse, wallet, and ID, were still in the house, untouched. Her cell phone wasn't there either. It was later discovered inside the family's only vehicle, a Chrysler minivan, which was also missing. Hours ticked by with no word from Joshua or the children. Then, around 5 p.m. that evening, Joshua finally returned home, bringing Charlie and Braden with him. Police immediately brought him in for questioning. His explanation? He claimed that after midnight on December 7th, he had taken his two sons on an impromptu camping trip to the Pony Express Trail in the western Utah desert, leaving Susan asleep at home. The account raised immediate red flags. Not only was there a blizzard that night, but temperatures were bitterly cold. The idea of a father taking two small boys out after midnight for a spontaneous camping excursion, in dangerous weather and on a workday, seemed implausible. Moreover, Joshua hadn't informed his workplace that he wouldn't be coming in. When asked why, he offered a baffling response: he had mistaken Monday for Sunday. Police wasted no time. On December 10th, just days later, officers traveled to the remote location Joshua had mentioned. But there was no trace of the campsite he described. No fire ring, no disturbed ground, no tent stakes, no trash. Nothing supported his story. The landscape was clean and untouched by recent human activity. Back in West Valley City, the situation grew stranger. On December 8th, Joshua underwent a second police interview. That night, instead of returning home, he rented a car from Salt Lake City International Airport. Investigators lost track of him for nearly 24 hours. When he resurfaced the next afternoon, he placed a call to his mother using a new, disposable phone. At that point, he was on Interstate 84 in Tremonton, Utah, heading back toward Salt Lake City. When later questioned by his sister Jennifer, Joshua claimed he had been aimlessly driving around, getting on and off the highway, attempting to clear his head. However, police weren't convinced. When they eventually examined the rental vehicle, they found that Joshua had driven over 800 miles during that mysterious time away. Where he went, and what he did, remains unknown to this day. On December 9th, detectives executed a search warrant on the Powell home. This time, what they uncovered painted an even darker picture. Small but telling spots of blood were found on the floor. Forensic testing would later confirm that one of those blood samples belonged to Susan. Another trace of blood could not be identified, it matched no one in the household and remains attributed to an unknown male. They also found a handwritten note written by Susan herself, voicing serious concerns about her safety. She expressed fear of Joshua and a sense that something terrible might happen to her. That letter, coupled with a substantial life insurance policy taken out in her name totaling $1.5 million, intensified the suspicions against her husband. While police continued to collect evidence, Joshua's behavior only grew more erratic. In the weeks following Susan's disappearance, he emptied her retirement accounts. He cancelled her standing medical appointments, including her regular visits to the chiropractor. He also withdrew Charlie and Braden from daycare, cutting off the children's daily routines with no explanation. Even more disturbing was what investigators learned from his co-workers. According to multiple accounts, Joshua had, on more than one occasion, spoken casually about the possibility of hiding a body in abandoned mineshafts scattered across the Utah desert. These offhand remarks, once brushed off as bizarre or dark humor, suddenly took on horrifying weight. As the evidence mounted, police turned their attention to the couple's children, particularly their elder son, Charlie. In interviews, the young boy confirmed that the late-night camping trip had taken place. But unlike Joshua's version, Charlie said that Susan had gone with them and never came back. That chilling contradiction shattered the fragile timeline Joshua had tried to construct. Weeks later, Charlie's behavior became even more unsettling. A schoolteacher reported that the boy had said his mother was dead. Meanwhile, daycare staff recalled another disturbing incident. Braden, then just a toddler, had drawn a picture of a vehicle with 3 people inside. He told staff members, "Mommy was in the trunk." By this time, investigators were closing in. They issued subpoenas for all television footage, aired and unaired, featuring Joshua. They wanted to analyze his demeanor, his choice of words, his facial expressions. Every clip became a puzzle piece in their growing case. When police announced their intentions to question him again, Joshua did something telling. He retained an attorney and began refusing cooperation. In mid-December, he packed up his sons and traveled north to Puyallup, Washington, to stay with his father, Susan Powell, for the holidays. Though authorities didn't formally name him a suspect, Joshua was now the prime person of interest. By Christmas Eve, police had made that designation public. Less than 2 weeks later, on January 6, 2010, Joshua returned to Utah with his brother Michael. But he didn't come to talk with investigators. Instead, he boxed up the family's remaining belongings. The message was clear: he wasn't coming back. Joshua was moving to Puyallup permanently, putting hundreds of miles between himself and the center of the investigation. But for detectives, distance was no obstacle. They had just begun to unravel the web of secrets surrounding Susan's disappearance, and what they'd soon learn from the Powell family's inner circle would be even more shocking. In the weeks following Susan Powell's disappearance, the investigation began to turn its gaze toward the family she had married into, a household that harbored secrets no one could have predicted. After relocating to Puyallup, Washington with his sons, Joshua Powell moved in with his father, Susan Powell. It was a decision that, at the time, seemed like the act of a grieving husband seeking support. In truth, it opened a door into a world of disturbing obsession and unsettling behaviors. Susan Powell had long been a controversial figure. During the initial stages of the investigation, authorities began examining the extended Powell family, looking for any inconsistencies, any clues that might help locate Susan. What they found in Susan's home wasn't just suspicious, it was outright deviant. Investigators, upon executing a search warrant, discovered hundreds of images of Susan. Many had been taken without her knowledge. Some were focused on her body, captured through windows and bathroom doorways. Susan had kept her items, used hygiene products, personal belongings, even toenail clippings, as trophies. Susan Powell admitted to being in love with his daughter-in-law. He had filmed her secretly, fantasized about her openly, and kept journals detailing his infatuation. In his own words, he believed she felt the same about him. There was, of course, no evidence that Susan returned any such feelings. What had once seemed like strained family dynamics now looked like a breeding ground for control, fixation, and surveillance. The discovery was more than enough to charge Susan with multiple counts of voyeurism and possession of child pornography unrelated to Susan. He was arrested in August 2011. His crimes painted a grotesque picture of the environment Joshua had grown up in, and the kind of man Susan had once trusted with her future. But Susan's arrest didn't loosen Joshua's grip on his sons. On the contrary, he grew increasingly paranoid and controlling. He began cutting off contact with Susan's side of the family, refusing phone calls from Chuck and Judy Cox, Susan's parents, and preventing them from seeing their grandsons. Joshua's behavior became erratic and volatile. He frequently clashed with social workers, displayed alarming emotional instability, and continued to refuse cooperation with police. Despite mounting evidence, prosecutors lacked one crucial piece: a body. Without it, charging Joshua with murder remained legally precarious. Investigators still considered him the only serious suspect, but they couldn't yet act decisively. Meanwhile, Joshua continued manipulating the narrative, ensuring the boys were kept within his reach and shielded from external influence. Behind closed doors, however, cracks were forming in his carefully maintained facade. Charlie and Braden had started talking, sometimes casually, sometimes in whispers. Charlie once told a counselor that his mother had joined them on the camping trip but didn't come home. At another point, Braden said something chilling to a social worker: "Daddy told me Mommy is dead." The children had internalized more than Joshua realized. Their small voices were beginning to betray the secrets he had tried to bury. In an effort to gain custody of the children, Chuck and Judy Cox pursued a court battle, citing not only Susan's unsolved disappearance but also the unstable environment Joshua and Susan created. They argued that Joshua was unfit to parent and that living under Susan's roof placed the boys at risk. The court agreed to investigate, launching a formal custody evaluation. In September 2011, Washington state authorities removed Charlie and Braden from Joshua's care and placed them in the custody of their maternal grandparents. Joshua was granted supervised visitation only, under strict conditions. The boys began living with Chuck and Judy while undergoing therapy. The court also mandated that Joshua complete a psychosexual evaluation and take a polygraph test, both of which he refused. During supervised visits, Joshua attempted to present himself as a devoted father. But those visits were watched carefully by caseworkers. One supervisor noted that Joshua seemed distant, distracted, and sometimes frustrated when the children didn't respond the way he wanted them to. There was a growing sense that he was under pressure he was no longer able to manage. Meanwhile, Joshua's brother, Michael Powell, had drawn attention of his own. Investigators learned that shortly after Susan disappeared, Michael had sold a car to a salvage yard in Oregon. When authorities located the vehicle months later, they brought in cadaver dogs to search it. The dogs reacted strongly to the trunk. Though no human remains were discovered, investigators believed the vehicle may have been used to dispose of evidence. Michael lawyered up immediately and refused further questioning. The theory began to form: Joshua may not have acted alone. Still, without a confession or physical remains, law enforcement found themselves stalled. They had a suspect, a motive, and disturbing circumstantial evidence. They had suspicious behavior, failed alibis, and contradictory statements. But no body, and no direct proof tying Joshua to Susan's presumed death. In January 2012, a judge ruled that Joshua would not regain custody of his sons until he completed the court-ordered evaluations. He remained under supervised visitation, with the boys continuing to live safely with the Cox family. With mounting legal pressure and growing isolation, Joshua's mask began to crack. He had once tried to project the image of a composed, wrongfully accused husband. But over time, he grew more reclusive, more erratic. Privately, he had written a will. He transferred funds, backed up digital files, and began giving away possessions. Those closest to him failed to notice, or didn't believe, the warning signs. On February 5, 2012, Joshua Powell did something no one saw coming. During a scheduled supervised visit with Charlie and Braden, the unthinkable happened. As the social worker approached the house with the boys, Joshua opened the door, ushered the children in, and slammed it shut behind them, locking the social worker outside. She pounded on the door. She screamed. She called 911. It was too late. Inside, Joshua had struck both of his sons with a hatchet before setting the house ablaze. The explosion was so violent, it leveled the structure. All three died in the inferno. The final act of control, violent, calculated, irreversible. The deaths of Charlie and Braden devastated the Cox family and enraged the public. The tragedy not only robbed them of any remaining hope but also underscored what they had feared all along, that Joshua Powell was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. The house Joshua Powell had rented was nothing but ash and rubble. The blast had been intentional, the result of gasoline poured throughout the interior and ignited with purpose. The autopsies confirmed what no one wanted to believe: Charlie and Braden had been attacked with a hatchet before being consumed by the fire. The inferno had been his escape, but more than that, it was a final act of defiance. Joshua Powell had not only silenced his children, he had ensured they could never testify against him. The nation watched in horror. The brutal deaths of the two boys, innocent, young, and full of life, shook a case that was already tragic to its core. Law enforcement, social workers, and the courts faced intense scrutiny. How had a man suspected in his wife's disappearance been allowed access to the children? Why wasn't he monitored more closely? Questions poured in from every direction, and no answer seemed satisfying enough. In the days following the explosion, authorities searched Joshua's storage units, his remaining digital files, and the remnants of his home. Among them, they found signs that he had meticulously planned the murder-suicide. He had made farewell videos, drafted last wishes, and written goodbye letters. In them, he expressed frustration at the legal system, anger at Susan's parents, and despair over losing his children. Yet, there was still no confession about what he had done to Susan. Even in death, he held on to the secret. Investigators turned their attention to the only remaining close relative who had shown signs of involvement: Michael Powell. Michael had been evasive and uncooperative for years. He had spoken rarely about Susan's disappearance and refused multiple requests to take a polygraph. The discovery of the salvaged car in Oregon raised red flags, especially after cadaver dogs had signaled possible traces of human remains in the trunk. But by the time police gathered enough interest to push harder, Michael was unraveling too. In early 2013, a year after Joshua's final act, Michael Powell jumped to his death from a parking garage in Minneapolis. He left no note, no final explanation. His suicide raised the chilling possibility that he too had known far more than he ever admitted. To this day, police believe Michael may have helped dispose of Susan's body, but like his brother, he took the truth with him to the grave. With Joshua and Michael gone, and Stephen Powell behind bars for unrelated crimes, investigators found themselves at a dead end. They had always believed Susan was murdered. Now, they were certain. But with no living suspect, no confession, and still no body, the case remained officially unsolved. Chuck and Judy Cox, devastated by the loss of their grandsons and the unresolved fate of their daughter, refused to let Susan's memory fade. They turned their grief into advocacy. In the years following the tragedy, the Coxes championed legislative changes designed to protect children in similar situations. Their efforts helped pass the Charlie and Braden law, aimed at preventing suspected abusers from retaining custody or unsupervised visitation. In 2015, Susan Powell was released from prison, having served his sentence for voyeurism and possession of child pornography. Despite being free, he remained a person of interest in Susan's case. Authorities hoped he might finally come forward with answers. But Stephen maintained his silence until his death in 2018. He never offered a single helpful detail. He died carrying secrets investigators believe he'd known all along. Forensic teams continued their efforts to locate Susan's remains. Over the years, numerous tips came in, reports of disturbed ground in remote areas, sightings near abandoned mines, possible burial sites along the Pony Express Trail. Each lead was followed. Some locations were excavated, others searched with cadaver dogs and sonar equipment. But none yielded conclusive results. One theory persisted above all, that Susan had been murdered the night she vanished and her body had been disposed of in a deep, inaccessible mineshaft. This theory aligned with comments Joshua had made before her disappearance, casually asking co-workers how to hide a body in the Utah desert. But despite thorough searches of known shafts in the region, Susan was never found. In 2019, a private investigator working with the Cox family unearthed new satellite imagery that showed disturbed ground near a mining area not previously searched. Crews explored the region, but again came up empty-handed. Hope flickered, but never caught fire. The case remains open in Utah. Though law enforcement considers it a cold case, they continue to accept tips. Every so often, a potential lead will emerge, sparking renewed efforts. But with every passing year, Susan's disappearance drifts further into the realm of haunting mystery. Yet, her story, and that of her sons, continues to impact policy, awareness, and the approach authorities take in domestic abuse cases. Susan's fate revealed the failures of a system meant to protect, exposing the blind spots that allowed a manipulative man to control the narrative and ultimately destroy those closest to him. The house in West Valley City where the tragedy began has long since been demolished. The empty lot is a quiet reminder of the violence that unfolded behind its walls. But for Chuck and Judy, Susan's absence is an everyday wound. They maintain a memorial website, speak publicly about domestic violence, and encourage people to recognize the signs of coercive control before it turns deadly. Susan Powell was a devoted mother, a warm and optimistic woman, and someone who, by all accounts, had been trying to make the best of a deteriorating marriage. She left behind more than an unsolved case, she left a legacy of caution, a testament to the insidious nature of abuse, and a warning that even in the absence of bruises, lives can be in danger. Though her body remains missing, her story is not forgotten. It lives in the laws that protect children from unstable parents, in the programs that teach people how to spot emotional manipulation, and in the hearts of those still fighting for justice. The final horror in this case wasn't just Joshua's ability to carry out murder, it was the time he had to do it. For years, he walked freely, denying involvement, manipulating the truth, and using the system's weaknesses to his advantage. And while he ultimately took his own life, he robbed everyone else of the closure they so desperately needed. Justice for Susan Powell may never come in the form of charges or a courtroom conviction. But her legacy, carved from tragedy, continues to shape a safer future. Thank you for listening to Crime Echoes with Lewis. Please like this video and subscribe for more content like this.